Imagine a motorcycle so rare and so uncompromising that it was never really designed for everyday streets. But for the starting grid of the world's fiercest competitions, this is the 1999 Yamaha R7, a homologation special that arrived at the turn of the millennium like a whispered legend. Built in tiny numbers and priced like an exotic, it forced riders and collectors alike to ask what it meant when a manufacturer pushed past practicality to chase glory. The R7 wasn't just another sport bike. It was a statement of intent, a machine that demanded sacrifice from both its builder and its owner, and in return offered an engineering purity almost too sharp for the real world. At a glance, it looked like a cousin of the approachable R6 or the mighty R1, but closer inspection revealed something else entirely. A road-legal race bike dressed in thin disguise, with limits far beyond what most riders would ever test. That paradox, being both attainable and unattainable, creates the enduring magnetism of the R7, and it's why decades later, enthusiasts still talk about this machine with awe. The deeper story isn't just about horsepower or lap times. It's about why Yamaha chose to gamble its reputation on a machine that was as much a challenge to own as it was a thrill to ride. And that gamble left ripples through the sport bike world, shaping how we think about what a street-legal motorcycle can be. If you're into stories like this, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which machine you want to explore next. The 1999 Yamaha R7 sits in a strange but captivating corner of motorcycle history. Within 30 words of any deep dive into this machine, its name must surface because it embodies Yamaha's boldest swing at homologation racing. What made the R7 instantly compelling wasn't just its scarcity, but the philosophy behind its creation. This wasn't a bike born to sell in showrooms or cruise suburban streets. It was designed to unlock a door into racing categories that demanded manufacturers build road-legal versions of their competition machines. The R7, or OW02 as Yamaha coded it, carried DNA pulled directly from the brand's racing laboratories, and that meant compromise for anyone expecting it to behave like a normal sport bike. Yet, to understand why Yamaha pursued such an uncompromising design, we need to retrace the cultural and mechanical conditions of the late 1990s when sport bike wars reached their fever pitch. Micro story. Picture the sport bike scene in 1998, riders dazzled by the arrival of the R1, a machine that reset expectations for leader-class dominance. Yamaha had captured headlines with that breakthrough, but the World Superbike Championship demanded something different. To compete against rivals in a rulebook-driven series, Yamaha couldn't simply race the R1 as it rolled off the line. They needed a purpose-built machine that could be homologated in low production numbers. That's where the R7 was conceived, not as an answer to consumer demand, but as Yamaha's ticket to remain credible on the world racing stage. For enthusiasts on the outside, the announcement of a new, ultra-limited Yamaha sport bike felt like a dream come true. But in reality, it was an expensive experiment meant for an elite few. Context digest. Homologation in motorcycle racing required manufacturers to sell a minimum number of road-legal versions of their race machines. For the R7, Yamaha set the production run at just 500 units worldwide. This wasn't about generating revenue. It was about satisfying rules that tied the fate of race teams to the presence of a legal, purchasable machine. For the buying public, this meant an opportunity to own a motorcycle far closer to a race bike than anything typically offered. But it also meant entering a realm of cost and exclusivity that most riders could barely comprehend. Micro story. When the R7 was unveiled at the Paris Motorcycle Show in 1998, enthusiasts crowded around it with a mix of awe and disbelief. Here was a machine with an aluminum delta box frame that looked like it had been lifted straight from Yamaha's GP program, suspension components from Öhlins that spoke of no compromise racing intent, and a 749cc inline-4 engine packed with titanium internals. Yet when specifications emerged, the headline number, about 106 horsepower in showroom form, left many scratching their heads. Why was a bike that cost almost twice as much as an R1 delivering power figures that seemed tame by comparison? The answer lay in regulations and the hidden potential Yamaha built into the machine. Reflection bridge. The R7 wasn't about what you got out of the crate. It was about what you could unlock if you knew where to look. Context digest. Yamaha had restricted the R7 for emissions and durability reasons, leaving the bike intentionally underpowered and road-going trim. To access its full potential, owners needed to invest in costly race kits that included revised ECU maps, higher compression ratios, and new camshaft profiles. Once unleashed, the R7 could produce north of 160 horsepower, and in full racing trim, it edged closer to 180. This meant the bike was a blank canvas, frustrating for casual owners, thrilling for race teams, and wildly impractical for anyone in between. Micro story: consider the financial realities. In 1999, buying an R7 set you back more than many cars, and that was before race kits and maintenance. A rider couldn't simply roll it off the showroom floor and experience its full capability. They had to commit thousands more dollars, specialized tuning, and the patience to treat the R7 like the high-strung machine it was. This created a paradox where the very people who could afford the R7 were often collectors who wouldn't ride it as intended, while the racers who needed it often had to scrape for sponsorship just to put one on the track. The result was a machine simultaneously celebrated as a masterpiece and criticized as unattainable. Context digest. By contrast, Yamaha's other offerings of the era, the R6 and R1, provided incredible performance at accessible price points. These bikes became icons because they delivered thrills to the average enthusiast. The R7 was the outlier, designed without compromise, and its rarity only deepened its mystique. While rivals found ways to balance homologation with broader consumer appeal, Yamaha doubled down on exclusivity. This decision made the R7 both legendary and polarizing. Microstory: imagine being a Yamaha dealer in 1999, receiving allocation of just one R7, or perhaps none at all. Enthusiasts would walk in, asking about the bike, only to hear that even if they had the cash, availability was near impossible. For those lucky enough to see one in the flesh, it looked like a jewel, bristling with racing hardware and exotic materials. For most, however, the R7 existed only in magazine spreads and whispered rumors, further fueling its myth. In a way, Yamaha's strategy ensured that the R7 would never be commonplace. It would live forever in the imagination of riders who dreamed of race machines on the street. Reflection bridge. But a machine this extreme wasn't built just for curiosity. It was meant to perform, and that's where the real story of the R7 begins. As the new millennium opened, the R7 took to circuits around the world, carrying Yamaha's hopes for championship relevance. What happened next defined its reputation forever, and that journey reveals as much about the state of racing as it does about the machine itself. The 1999 Yamaha R7 emerges again at the start of this chapter because its destiny was never confined to the showroom. It was built to prove itself on racetracks, and that pressure shaped its legacy. Once homologated, the R7 faced the brutal reality of competition, where rulebooks favored certain engine formats and budgets determined whether a machine could be fully developed. Yamaha had placed its hopes in a motorcycle that was dazzlingly engineered but financially demanding to maximize. This set up a tension between the purity of the R7's design and the compromises Yamaha had to make to remain competitive against rivals who brought not just machinery, but deeper funding to the paddock. Microstory. One of the earliest challenges for the R7 was adapting its restricted street configuration into a machine capable of keeping pace with dominant rivals. On paper, once race-kitted, the R7 looked formidable. Featherweight chassis, Öhlins suspension, and a screaming inline-4 with sky-high revs. But in reality, its displacement left it at a disadvantage against larger capacity competitors that benefited from balancing rules. Teams worked tirelessly to extract every ounce of performance, but the bike demanded investment that not every privateer could muster. In some cases, riders found themselves with one of the most exotic platforms available, but without the resources to unlock its full promise, creating frustration and heartbreak on the racing stage. Context digest. Racing in the late 1990s and early 2000s wasn't just about engineering brilliance. It was about political and financial leverage within sanctioning bodies. Rules often favored certain engine sizes, giving larger displacement machines headroom to dominate. Yamaha's 749cc R7 had to overachieve in every other area just to stay competitive. This meant that while the R7 gained respect as a razor-sharp platform, it also highlighted how rule structures could tilt the playing field. That tension made every R7 outing more of an uphill battle. Microstory. For riders who did manage to pilot the R7 in competition, the experience was unforgettable. The bike's chassis balance, razor precision, and stable feedback under braking gave confidence unmatched by bulkier machines. It was a surgeon's tool in a world of hammers. Yet even as riders praised its handling, the lack of outright horsepower compared to larger rivals meant constant fights to hold positions on straights, only to claw them back in corners. This made for thrilling but exhausting races where the R7 demanded nothing less than perfection from those who dared to push it. Reflection bridge. The R7's racing story wasn't about domination. It was about defiance against the odds. Context digest. Yamaha's decision to build only 500 R7s also meant limited development and fewer customer teams on track. While other manufacturers flooded grids with bikes, Yamaha's representation was sparse, reducing the machine's ability to gain traction and results. Still, for the devoted few who ran the R7, every race became an act of loyalty to a machine that symbolized pure engineering over practical advantage. This cult-like commitment is part of why the R7 remains admired long after its competitive window closed. Micro story. Away from the track, the R7 developed a parallel reputation. Owners who weren't racers often kept the bikes as treasured collectibles. Some never even fired up after delivery. Others tried to ride them on the street, discovering quickly that the R7 was an unforgiving companion for daily use. Tall gearing, uncompromising ergonomics, and the frustration of restricted performance made it less a road toy and more a museum piece with a license plate. And yet, that very impracticality only deepened its allure. Here was a motorcycle that refused to dilute its DNA, no matter the consequences. Context digest. Compared to Yamaha's mainstream offerings, the R7 stood apart like a limited-run concept car. The R6 became a supersport staple, the R1 a leader-class icon, but the R7 existed in a category of one. It was too rare to impact sales figures, too raw for mass ownership, and too expensive for casual racing. Still, it achieved exactly what Yamaha intended. It allowed the company to say, "We are here, we are competing, and we are not afraid to build something uncompromising." That message resonated beyond the racetrack. Micro story. One telling moment came years later, when collectors began bidding up the value of surviving R7s far beyond their original asking price. What had once been criticized as overpriced suddenly seemed like a bargain in retrospect. Enthusiasts realized that the R7 wasn't about numbers on a spec sheet or wins on a leaderboard. It was about Yamaha's willingness to make a machine that bent the rules of commerce for the sake of competition. In a world where most bikes chase volume and profit, the R7 had chased purity. And in the end, that pursuit made it unforgettable. Reflection bridge. But no story about the R7 is complete without looking at the legacy it left behind in Yamaha's lineup and the influence it cast over an entire generation of sport bikes. The path forward from this machine reveals why its myth only grew stronger with time. The 1999 Yamaha R7 commands attention once more because its influence did not fade when racing results stopped. Instead, it echoed through Yamaha's lineup and into the culture of sport bike enthusiasts. By existing at all, the R7 forced a conversation about what a manufacturer was willing to sacrifice to chase racing legitimacy. It also demonstrated that sometimes the machines with the shortest production runs leave the deepest marks, precisely because their existence feels improbable. This paradox has made the R7 not only a collectible, but a reference point whenever enthusiasts talk about purity of design. Micro story. Consider the R7's relationship to the R1 and R6. These siblings became Yamaha's bread and butter, delivering thrills to thousands of riders around the world. But they also inherited lessons from the R7, chassis geometry tuned for razor-sharp response, suspension setups influenced by race-level technology, and a philosophy that handling was as important as horsepower. Even if the R7 itself was too rare to define a generation, its DNA spread quietly into models that reached far more riders. In this way, the R7's uncompromising character shaped motorcycles that were far more accessible. Context digest. Homologation specials like the R7 often serve as technological testbeds. Features developed at great expense for a limited machine trickle down into broader lineups, eventually becoming standard. Yamaha's willingness to invest in Olin suspension, titanium components, and advanced electronics on the R7 created a foundation for future R-series refinements. This strategy proved that even a bike that failed to dominate race results could succeed in seeding innovation. Micro story. Beyond technology, the R7's scarcity fueled its cultural status. Owners who preserved their bikes untouched created a mythology around them, while the few who rode them aggressively became legends within niche circles. Motorcycle magazines of the era often portrayed the R7 as unattainable, a machine you might see once in your life if lucky. That aura has only intensified with time, as surviving examples surface at auctions with price tags that astonish even seasoned collectors. The idea of a factory building something this extreme, with so little concern for commercial viability, feels almost impossible today, and that impossibility makes the R7 a beacon for enthusiasts who crave authenticity. Context Digest. By the early 2000s, racing rules shifted again, making bikes like the R7 even harder to justify. Larger capacity machines gained headroom, and the 750cc category lost its prominence. In hindsight, this made the R7's creation even more remarkable. Yamaha invested heavily in a platform that had a narrow window of opportunity. Yet instead of being forgotten, the R7 became a symbol of that transitional moment in sport bike history. Micro-story. In modern times, when Yamaha revived the R7 nameplate for a middleweight twin, the contrast to the 1999 Homologation Special was striking. While the newer model targeted accessibility and affordability, enthusiasts couldn't help but compare it to the original Halo machine. This only amplified the mystique of the 1999 version, as purists emphasized how radically different its mission had been. The fact that Yamaha would recycle the badge decades later underscores the original R7's cultural power. It created a name strong enough to resonate long after its brief production. Reflection Bridge. The true measure of the R7's impact lies not in statistics or trophies, but in the way it continues to spark debates and inspire reverence. For a motorcycle produced in such tiny numbers, its voice remains impossibly loud. And that resonance leads us to the broader truth. Machines like the 1999 Yamaha R7 matter not just for what they did, but for what they symbolize about ambition and audacity. As we bring this story full circle, the closing thoughts reveal why this motorcycle's legacy still feels urgent for today's riders. The 1999 Yamaha R7 has carried us through a story of paradoxes. A motorcycle built not to satisfy the masses, but to fulfill the demands of racing, only to become an icon of exclusivity. At the beginning, we asked why Yamaha would create such a rare and uncompromising machine when more practical and profitable options already filled showrooms. Now looking back, the answer is clear. The R7 was a symbol, not a product. A motorcycle whose purpose was to legitimize Yamaha's place on the world stage and push the limits of what a factory was willing to build. For US viewers, the implications are particularly fascinating. Unlike mainstream Yamahas that populated dealerships across the country, the R7 was something you might never see in person. Its rarity created an aura of myth, the kind of machine you'd read about in magazines or glimpse at a track day if you were lucky. Owning one wasn't just about writing a check. It meant entering into an elite circle, accepting the costs of unlocking its potential, and knowing that you were handling one of only 500 ever made. In practical terms, the R7 wasn't the best Yamaha you could buy for the street, nor was it the easiest to maintain. It was finicky, demanding, and wildly expensive to modify. But that's exactly why it continues to fascinate collectors. Today, surviving examples are carefully preserved, often fetching astronomical prices at auction. For those who keep them, it's not about the ride. It's about holding a piece of Yamaha's boldest experiment. For everyday enthusiasts, the R7's legacy lives on in more attainable R-Series bikes, where lessons learned from its chassis and race engineering filtered down into machines that actually filled American garages. In that sense, the R7 proved that even a limited, financially impractical model could shape the DNA of a brand for decades. Its existence reminds us that sometimes the greatest impact comes not from volume but from vision. In a landscape where manufacturers are increasingly cautious, the R7 stands as a reminder that risk can create immortality. And that is why, more than 2 decades later, the 1999 Yamaha R7 is still talked about with reverence. As a machine that wasn't just built for racing glory, it was built to leave a permanent mark on motorcycle history.